And there we can see, of course, Prince Edward and Princess Anne also, that were all joined together as they went to see some of the wishes that came from the public that came out to Balmoral. Also, I should mention that the family did wave goodbye just outside Balmoral Castle before leaving the well-wishers. This is BBC News with the latest headlines. Crowds gather at Buckingham Palace and the Mall after Charles III is formally proclaimed king. The king swore an oath and paid tribute to the late Queen at his accession ceremony in St James's Palace, televised for the first time.
God save the king.
God save the king.
The king announces a bank holiday across the UK for the day of the Queen's funeral. And senior members of the royal family greet crowds and view floral tributes at Balmoral after attending a private church service. Charles III has been proclaimed king in a ceremony at St James's Palace in front of hundreds of members of the Privy Council. In a traditional ceremony, but one which was televised for the first time, the new Lord President, the Conservative MP Penny Mordaunt, confirmed the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II before the new monarch swore an oath. Let me turn now to Buckingham Palace and to my colleague Rebecca Jones.
Yes, good afternoon from Buckingham Palace, where the new king, King Charles III, is inside. He returned from that meeting of the Accession Council at St James's Palace at about 12:30. In the last few minutes, we have seen the departure from the palace of Camilla, the Queen Consort. We did wonder, perhaps, whether the new king might come out and greet the sizable crowds that are still here. There was a flurry of activity with various police officers moving into position. The gates were opened. I've no doubt at all that the huge crowds that are here would love him to come out and see them and do a sort of impromptu walkabout, much like he did yesterday, where he greeted people here. He heard about their sorrow about the death of the Queen, but was also warmly welcomed as the new king. He has had a busy afternoon inside Buckingham Palace. He's been meeting religious leaders, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Westminster. We know, of course, that the funeral of the Queen will be held at Westminster Abbey. Most of that will have been planned in advance, but who knows, there may be some details that need to be ironed out, and he's been meeting those religious leaders, also having political meetings as well with members of the cabinet, and also opposition party leaders have been coming to Buckingham Palace as well. Well, I'm joined here at Buckingham Palace by our home editor Mark Easton and our political editor Chris Mason. And Chris, if we perhaps start with you, because I was mentioning those political meetings first of all, it'll be very different, won't it? Because as Prince Charles, he will have met and known many of these politicians, but this time he's meeting them as king.
Yeah, and I think what we see at a moment like this is exposure to sunlight, if you like, of the British Constitution in its complexity and some of the bizarre elements of it, between the monarchy and Parliament, between what's been described in the past by Sir Walter Bagehot, essayist hundreds of years ago, as the dignified part of the British Constitution, reference there to the monarchy, and the efficient, the governing and the parliamentary element of it. And for the opposition party leaders heading in around about now to meet the King, and the cabinet ministers as well, they feel the weight of the history of a moment like this. Some of them, many of them, will have encountered Prince Charles as he was in his previous role, but this a very different role. And certainly for many of those in the cabinet, some of them only joining the cabinet a matter of days ago, they are new to their roles, just as the King is new to his, and suddenly finding themselves at the centre of this global spectacle. Cameras expected to capture those moments of at least the start of the audiences with the political leaders. And speaking to them this morning, yeah, they really feel the weight of this as a as a moment in history and as a global occasion.
Yeah. Mark, to pick out one phrase Chris used there, a global spectacle. And we certainly had spectacle this morning, didn't we? And I was very struck. I mean, it was very traditional, that ceremony this morning, and formal.
Chris used the word bizarre, actually, and I think for a lot of people it will have looked really odd.
Yeah.
I mean, the language is so archaic, all the bowing and the formality of it, and then afterwards the pageantry, people in silly hats and feathers and bright colours, and men with pikes, for goodness sake. But I would say, people are leaving the palace as we're speaking. So
yes.
I'm not quite sure whether
now you can
series
tell
of cars coming out.
It's a series of cars. We would know if it was the King's car, because I think it would have the flag on top of the car. So it may well not be the Sovereign's car, but there's certainly some movement. And as I said, we certainly saw the departure of the Queen Consort Camilla a little earlier. We'll just keep looking at these shots. You two gentlemen are considerably taller than me. Can you see over the crowds?
All bar one of the cars has turned around to the left of Buckingham Palace. Just the one has headed down the Mall, and it must be around about at least a dozen cars.
Could these be the
out.
Politicians, members of the cabinet, perhaps, Chris, who've been in to see the new king?
That is possible, because on the time frame that we were given, and the timings can slip a little on occasions and days like this, the cabinet were due into the palace at around about 2:30. So that could explain the number of cars leaving all at once, given the number of cabinet ministers who I would have thought would have been very keen to be part of the audience with the king. I will see if I can find a definitive answer, but I think at this stage that would be a reasonable thing to speculate
Yes.
on. Some further cars, it looks like, just approaching the gates right now as well.
Yes, and the gates remain open. Mark, just to carry on with
I mean,
your
one can
thought.
see that all these cars coming out in a way that it's a sort of physical representation of the workload that the new king, just a day or so into the job, is having to undertake at this point. We were talking about the flummery. We were talking about the pageantry of this morning, and I think for many people it will be, what on earth is all this about? Actually, I think it's a hugely important part of the process.
Yes.
We saw the informality yesterday with the king greeting the crowds, even getting a kiss on the cheek.
Yeah.
This morning we saw something very, very different, and it is that marriage of the ancient and the modern that I think is going to define the new king. He's going to want to find the correct balance. Now, his mother had a very clear distinction between her private life, if you like, her emotional personality, and her public duties. I think we're seeing something slightly different with Charles. I think we're seeing somebody who is more comfortable to show a bit of his personality.
Well, it was interesting last night in that address to the nation. He spoke not only of his darling mama, but also of his darling wife.
Yes, and how much he loved her.
Yeah.
And of course we did hear that from the Queen about Philip, but it was on very rare occasions.
Yeah.
We saw a king, I think, who was entirely at ease with his people, and the expectation is we may have another walkabout this afternoon, and that I think would be in keeping with a monarch who is making sure that there are two things happening at the same time. One is the formal and the sort of custom, the convention that goes with an ancient monarchy, but also searching for an identity that is different from his mother's. He referred in his address last night, I'm just going to remind myself of the words, of the late Queen's abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress. And that continuity and change dynamic, it clearly mattered to the Queen, we know, but also will be hugely important for the new king.
Chris, just a brief word from you. I know you've been on your phone. Have you confirmed they were members of the cabinet leaving?
I haven't yet. I have texted various people to try and establish it.
It's the slow Wi-Fi, don't worry about that.
There's another little hint of speculation here, but I just wonder that if you've had an audience with the king, it may take a little longer than normal to flick your phone from airplane mode back into conventional mode. That's my excuse anyway. As soon as I've confirmed it, I'll let you know.
Lovely. Chris Mason, our political editor, Mark Easton, our home editor. Thank you both. And with that, I'll hand you back to Nuala.
Thanks very much, Rebecca, and also, of course, to Chris and Mark. We'll be back with them a little later. Now, at his proclamation ceremony held earlier at St James's Palace, King Charles paid tribute to his late mother, saying her reign had been unequalled in dedication, duration and devotion. He vowed to follow her example and seek peace, harmony and the prosperity of all the nations, where he is now head of state. He also confirmed that the day of the Queen's funeral will be a bank holiday across the country. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchall, has been watching today's events.
In the setting of London's original royal palace at St James's, the Accession Council, a meeting of 200 privy councillors, Britain's political leaders, past and present, with other notable figures, a meeting rooted in past centuries, essential to the transition to a new reign and seen for the first time through television. The King joined the Accession Council gathered in the palace's throne room to make his declaration.
It is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. My mother's reign was unequalled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
The King took a centuries-old oath to preserve the position of the Church of Scotland.
I, Charles III, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland.
Watched by the heir to the throne, Prince William, Prince of Wales, and Camilla the Queen Consort, he signed the oath Charles R., Charles Rex, King. And then a moment of pageantry. From a balcony, the proclamation of the new King's reign.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
The King's Guard gave 3 cheers.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip!
Hooray!
Hip hip!
Hooray!
Hip hip!
Hooray!
Following centuries-old tradition, the proclamation was also issued in the City of London. It will be repeated in Britain's other national capitals tomorrow.
Hooray! Hip hip!
affirming and proclaiming the reign of Charles III to all corners of his kingdom. Nicholas Witchall, BBC News.
At Windsor Castle, where the Queen chose to spend most of her time in the past year, the flag, which had been at half-mast since her death, was raised again in recognition of the King's proclamation. Crowds have continued to gather outside the late Queen's residences across the country to lay flowers and to pay their respects to Her Majesty. Our correspondent, Dan Johnson, reports now from Windsor.
Terry Stelling served in Her Majesty's name, and this morning he came to Windsor to pay thanks for her service.
Ma'am, it was an honour to serve you and the country. God bless you, your servant. I swore an allegiance to the Queen when I first joined up. While she was there, everybody had so much confidence. But now that she's gone, we don't know what the King's going to be. We've got a new Prime Minister. Everything's changing all at once.
And that shift was symbolised here as the new King was officially proclaimed. Modern methods are being used to keep up with the most ancient ceremonies. Tim was keeping an eye on the Accession Council meeting.
It's a sad day and a good day for the King. So mixed emotions.
What do you think of all the the ceremony? It's a big moment in the life of the nation.
We've never known anyone other than the Queen, and nor are most people in this country. So it's a momentous time, yeah.
All sorts of people have come for all kinds of reasons, from many different places, to leave their own tribute. But as ever, it is the Queen herself who's the consistent presence, the unifying force here.
The flowers are being moved each night into the castle itself, so what's here now is just what's built up this morning. And if we turn around to look down Windsor's long walk, you can see just how many people there are arriving.
The scene is similar at Buckingham Palace. So what does the Queen mean to Shirley?
Everything. I've known her all my life. And her father before. And it's a privilege to be here. To just be part of what everybody feels. We've lost someone very, very gracious.
Some are here in Windsor in sadness, others in gratitude. And there's a broader sense of what a big change this is in the life of the nation.
This is all just who we are as the British, isn't it? All coming together, and yeah, you just feel very united.
You feel that she's still here. That's all I can say.
This is about duty, respect, and giving thanks for the Queen we've lost and for the new King. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Windsor.
Well, as we heard, King Charles III has been formally proclaimed the new monarch in a ceremony at St James's Palace. About 200 members of the Privy Council gathered, including Liz Truss, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and all surviving former Prime Ministers.
The business for part 1 of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself, shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the clerk of the council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the king.
God save the king.
A short but very significant ceremony this morning. Well, let us turn back to Buckingham Palace, where Charlotte Gallagher is with the crowds that are gathering outside. Charlotte.
Yes, Nuala, and I have to say, I was down here yesterday and the crowds have just increased, thousands and thousands. In fact, there's so many people, they've had to stop letting people lay flowers in front of Buckingham Palace, and they've moved them to the nearby Green Park instead, because so many people have wanted to come down, pay their respects to Queen Elizabeth, and also essentially welcome King Charles III to his new job. He drove past earlier, the Queen Consort Camilla drove past earlier, and there were huge cheers and claps from the crowd. And let's talk to some of the people that have come down here today. This lady has said definitely not. These two ladies, hello.
Hello.
Hello, what's your name?
Carol.
And whereabouts have you come from?
I've come down this morning from Newcastle.
So, pretty long journey. Why did you want to come down?
Oh, just to pay our respects.
And what
she's been a queen, and she went under the throne 10 years after I was born, and we've only ever known one queen, and she's just an amazing woman. She's given out her all, and she's given us everything.
And you've seen her grow, her children grow up, her grandchildren grow up, her great-grandchildren. Almost somehow like she's part of the family. She's just embedded into this culture,
it's like
isn't she?
losing a grandmother to the whole nation. She really is.
And how did you feel when you heard the news?
Tearful. Yeah, tearful. Sad. But then she can't live forever, but she couldn't have given her any more than what she's given her. She's been a wonderful, wonderful woman. And the whole country, the nation, are just as proud to have had her as queen.
And it was inevitable it would happen, but it still was a shock, wasn't it?
It was, yes. Because the thing is, like, the palace never gives you enough info as what's going on. So you're looking at her 3 days previous, shaking the hand with Liz Truss, and then next thing you know, you're being told she's passed away. It was a shock.
And is this the first time you've come to the palace to mark something, or have you been before?
We've been many
Jubilees?
times before. Yeah, we've been many times before, because it's not that far from Newcastle, but we just felt like we had to be here today.
And what's the atmosphere like?
It's amazing. The amount of people that's turned up is absolutely amazing. You can't put words into it. You really can't.
Did you see King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla go past earlier?
We saw Camilla go past, but we haven't seen Charles.
It's strange, isn't it, remembering to call him King Charles? Because I keep wanting to say
Yes,
Prince Charles.
Yes, yeah. But no, I haven't seen him yet. We're hoping to see him before we leave. So fingers crossed.
And is this your husband here?
This is my husband, Joe. Yeah.
And what do you think of the royal family?
I think the Queen has done a phenomenal job, and it's sad that she's not going to be there. I've lived all my life with the Queen, and it's going to be a change living with a king. And
it's been going to be hard to get
good
used
lad,
to.
Charles. I hope he does well, you know. it's sad.
A real shift for everyone, because even if
a
you
massive shift, and a big shift for William.
Yeah.
All our lives are going to change. They're not going to be as free as what they've ever been before. But then, she's given them the chance to live their life right. I mean, Charles is 73-year-old. He's had a good life, and to come onto the throne at 73, he's had the freedom to do basically what he wanted to do, but he's worked hard. And it's him going on the throne now has given William a chance to be a family man and then become king.
Freedom that his mum didn't get to have, because
right.
it was just straight away launched into that life.
And she's allowed that to happen because she's known what her life turned around at the age it did. She's allowed them to have, she always said she would never give the throne up, and she's allowed them to have a life. And I think this is what Charles wants. He wants William to have a bit of life and a bit of, family freedom with his grandchildren. Hopefully he'll be around for a while before things change again. Yeah.
Thank you very much. How about yourself? Whereabouts are you from?
We are from Cologne, actually.
Oh, Cologne.
Yes, so we are on vacation. So it was planned a month ago, and we just here, we heard it in Paris. We were the last 3 days in Paris, and then we heard that the Queen died, and it was even for us a shocking moment. And then we said 4 days in London is not enough. We stay 6 days, so we are here until next Friday, and we are looking what we can do here and paying respect to the Queen. Even in Germany, it was I'm born in 2000 and I don't know any other, so it's just the Queen, and now it's a little bit confusing. It's a time of change, and we are looking forward what comes with King Charles.
Thank you so much. And there really are, Nuala, people from all over Britain and all over the world here, not just part of the Commonwealth, as you heard there, that man from Germany. And it just shows you what an international figure Queen Elizabeth was, how respected she was. And she was the most famous woman in the world, and people here really want to pay their respects and remember her.
Thanks so much, Charlotte, and to all your guests, of course, that were chatting with you there as well. Well, now let's go through some of the key events that are expected over the next 10 days. The Queen's coffin is expected to leave Balmoral tomorrow to be taken to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. It will be taken in a procession along the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral for a service attended by members of the royal family. The Queen will remain at St Giles for a period of lying at rest. The coffin will then be flown to London and taken to Buckingham Palace and then to the Palace of Westminster. And it is there, in the ancient space of Westminster Hall, that the Queen will lie in state, members of the public having the opportunity to pay their respects. The conclusion of these events will be the state funeral in around 10 days' time at Westminster Abbey, after which the Queen will be laid to rest at St George's Chapel, Windsor. I'm joined now by royal historian and author Sarah Gristwood, author of Elizabeth, Queen and Crown. Thanks so much for joining us. It is these events that are very much taking place, I think at maybe a dizzying speed as well for some, trying to come to terms with the end of one reign and the beginning of another. How are you seeing it, Sarah?
Yes, I think very much there was the initial sense that an era had ended. But of course, that's the great anomaly for the death of a monarch, the change for the royal family. On the one hand, it's an end, and on the other, it's a beginning. It really is, the Queen is dead, long live the King. And I think that the palace, the establishment are very much aware of that kind of dual need to mourn the one that's gone, but in a sense use that residual, that surge of goodwill to welcome in the one who's to come.
It is really something to watch the crowds, either those that met King Charles III yesterday as he arrived in Buckingham Palace, or indeed some of the well-wishers that were at Balmoral Castle just in the past hour as members of the royal family went to view floral tributes. And I just wonder, for some of these events, ceremonial events that are taking place, do you think they help the public move to the next stage?
Yes, I do. And I also think that they do help the monarchy, the establishment, if you like, because it does, sort of the images of King Charles doing that, very agreeable, friendly walkabout does help that kind of goodwill that he absolutely needs, because, of course, his mother, the Queen, died at a difficult moment. A very new Prime Minister, looming economic crisis, just emerged from COVID, and also, of course, a difficult moment for the royal family over the last few years, with Prince Andrew's disgrace, with Harry and Meghan's departure. And so there always has been concern, I think. An American interviewer yesterday asked me whether I thought this was the most important moment, the most crucial moment the monarchy had ever had, and I blinked a bit. But I could see where they were coming from. What they meant was, could this have been the moment the monarchy came to an end? That the British line actually ended. And clearly, I think King Charles's speech went down very well with all of us. It was reassuringly convincing that he has done a lot of thinking about the way ahead, about the role for the crown. But I think public events and that visible symbols of public goodwill, all those flowers and all those people, I think it's helpful all round.
Let me turn as well, as King Charles has mentioned his age, that he is coming to the throne, of course, so much older than his mother did. But how much do you think he will continue to rule in the way that she did? Has he been, in a very practical sense, this heir in waiting, watching every duty and responsibility that she carried out in that exemplary way that she did?
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? There have obviously, over the years and the decades, been concern about what kind of a king Prince Charles would prove to be. He tried to give reassurance himself, didn't he, some years ago, saying that he knew the rules of non-involvement were different for a sovereign. But I think, again, that speech was so carefully on the one hand, but on the other. He praised his mother's love of tradition, but willingness to embrace change. He spoke of how we were a nation of many faiths, but he had a particular responsibility to the churches of England and of Scotland. He spoke of that need to accept the best, the responsibilities, the duties of a monarch, but also made it clear that he was open, was expecting to introduce some new ideas. So I think that was very careful.
What did you think also, Sarah, about how often the word love was mentioned, which perhaps is not something that we often think in these very formal pronouncements or indeed statements?
No, I couldn't agree more. That's one of the things I meant by signalling change. I think he said, he referenced a number of times the words of his mother's 21st birthday speech, the famous one, my life, long or short, devoted to your service. But it's hard to imagine his mother, or heaven knows any of the monarchs who went before her, promising to rule with love. What did he say? With loyalty, with respect, and he would serve us with loyalty, respect, and love. And that's quite a 21st century way of phrasing it, I think. Very telling.
Yes, I thought so as well. And I suppose in the coming days, we will be watching as these events continue to unfold. I'd just like to get your thoughts very briefly on what you saw this morning. I mean, as somebody who studies the Constitution and the monarchy, that must have been something so unique.
Yes, it was. It absolutely was. But of course, the more so because we saw so much of it. Again, that's a real on the one hand, but on the other moment. It was the pageantry, that, you know, the throne room, the extraordinary costumes in the ceremonies afterwards, but it was King Charles's own decision that cameras should be allowed to witness that Accession Council. And that's something quite new. And I think an absolutely right decision.
It was really something to see, I have to say, just witnessing it as we all did this morning, the secular, the private, the religious, all in the one room for that momentous occasion. Sarah Gristwood, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Let us turn back to Balmoral and to Kirsty Wark.
Nuala, the buses are still arriving every 15 minutes from nearby Ballater, full of people coming with all manner of flowers, dogs, pets, to come and pay their respects at the gates of Balmoral. And this has been a steady stream in the beautiful sunshine, not quite so sunny now, but it's been an extraordinary day. And at 2 o'clock today, the members of the royal family staying here, led by Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, left in a fleet of cars to go to Crathy Church, where the Reverend Kenneth Mackenzie has been the minister since 2005. And they all have been there since they were children, going to Sunday service along with local people. And they had a short service of prayer there. And that is the first time that these members of the royal family have been in public since the death of the monarch. A very moving occasion for children and grandchildren. In fact, we must remember that the grandchildren have lost their grandmother and their grandfather in the space of a year. So they were talking to the crowd. They were asking where the flowers had come from. Had they come from the garden? Prince Andrew was asked about this day, and what he said was, well, you know, this is a day for the family. Tomorrow we move on. And tomorrow, indeed, things do move on, because the coffin will be moved from here. It will travel to Edinburgh, first to Holyrood, and then to lie in state at St Giles. But before it gets very far at all, it'll go to the village of Ballater. It'll go through the village of Ballater, which meant so much to the Queen. Queen knew many locals, many shopkeepers. And the coffin will make a special stop in Ballater to allow the people of Ballater to pay their own respects. And then it is expected to travel on very slowly down to Edinburgh. So really, people, I'm sure, will still come to Balmoral. But I think partly they're coming because they're coming not only to pay their respects, but to be close to their Queen. A lot of these people are locals, but, you know, I spoke to someone from Greece, from Surrey, from Suffolk. You know, people are coming from all over, and certainly all over Aberdeenshire, because they know that for them, Aberdeenshire was a very special place for the Queen, and so therefore they want to be part of that same experience. And I think actually watching the royal family, it must have been a very difficult walk for them, but I think they drew solace from the crowds. I think, you know, when you saw them smiling and certainly comforting each other, they were just like an ordinary family who have been bereaved. And, you know, there'll be nobody in this crowd who hasn't had a close bereavement. And so I think there was a feeling of sympathy and empathy on both sides, Nuala.
That was exactly the point, Kirsty, that struck me as I was watching them. They felt so relatable because obviously their grief was very visible as they walked by, but also, as we all have done at funerals we have been to, or when we are mourning a loved one, a little chuckle, a little memory, an arm around a relative. And I thought it was very moving to watch them interact just very briefly with the well-wishers, but very much being together as a family.
Yes, and I mean, you must remember that this is their private home in Scotland. It's like Sandringham, it's not part of the Crown Estate. So they feel very much, they're not coming to some grand castle, though it is pretty grand. They're not coming to a grand castle. It was actually built by Prince Albert for Queen Victoria in the 1850s from granite, which was quarried from the estate. So the very bones of this place are part of the royal family and long tradition, and they feel most at home here. And I just think what's so interesting about this is just how quiet everything is here. People are moving with such dignity, you know, and little girls dressed in tartan dresses, you know. There was a man in full dress kilt here. People have really either come casually, but many people have dressed up to make the journey.
And it's hard, of course, to know, Kirsty, what it will mean in the coming weeks, months, years Because when I think of Balmoral, and I'm sure many people do, they think of the Queen.
Yes, they do think of the Queen, but what also you have to remember is that King Charles III absolutely loves Balmoral as well. And part of his connection with Balmoral is because he was so close to his grandmother. And his grandmother's house is on this vast estate. It's about 10 miles away at Burke Hall. And after the death of the Queen Mother, he came here to spend some quiet time, some contemplative time. Now, obviously, as a new king, there are many, many calls on his time. You know, he has a very big job to do. But I imagine that they will try and keep that period in August and early September, when actually there are no formal duties bar one. And the only formal duty the royal family has here is to open the Highland Games at Braemar. And this was the first year, as we know, of course, because, well, there was lockdown, but the Queen could not attend. And actually, King Charles, as he is now, and the Queen Consort opened the Games at Braemar. But apart from that, this is a time for the royal family to greet friends, greet guests, grand and not so grand. I mean, apparently once Margaret Thatcher, having been here, actually sent the Queen a pair of rubber gloves. I don't know if that was meant to be ironic or not, but the truth is that they wash up after these picnics. That's what happens. They pass the Tupperware, they're told to get the dish towel out because the Queen apparently preferred to wash rather than dry. And lots of people have got stories of being here. I mean, the estate is vast, and so people like, you know, there was an American couple who were out walking, apparently, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but they were out walking, they saw a woman in a tweed skirt and a headscarf coming along the road very quietly, and they said, you know, what the heck, you look very like the Queen. And she said, a lot of people tell me that. And she walked on with a smile. You know, the Queen had a marvellous sense of humour. And, you know, I imagine there's other members of the royal family who've got an equally great sense of humour, and I think the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, is just one of them.
I have to say, it does look, of course, like such a beautiful place to be, and so many, of course, making that journey, as I can see behind you as well, Kirsty. Thank you so much. So interesting to hear some of the anecdotes and history of Balmoral. Well, when the Queen came to the throne in 1952, Britain's role in the world was changing rapidly. Former colonies were gaining independence as the British Empire evolved into the Commonwealth. And the 7 decades of the Queen's reign saw even greater change. In a moment, we'll hear from Yogita Limaye in Delhi and Tawfik in Jamaica. But first, Anne Soy reports from Kenya. The country Princess Elizabeth was visiting when she received news of her father's death and her accession at the age of 25.
The royal visitors stepped off into the hot sunshine of Nairobi.
February 1952. The then Princess Elizabeth came to Kenya to represent her ailing father. Unknown to her, it was here that she would become queen after his unexpected death.
And from her car, the princess took many feet of film with her cine camera.
It was a tour of duty, but she and her husband took time to also enjoy the colony's vast wildlife. They stayed at a secluded treehouse that once stood here. One of the hunters who had accompanied her said that for the first time in the history of the world, a young girl climbed into a tree one day a princess, and climbed down from the tree the next day a queen. She took the reins at a time of great change in Africa. Colonies gained independence and became republics. As head of the Commonwealth, the Queen reached out and helped bring them into the fold. She made bold moves. Here, seen dancing with a black man for the first time, Ghana's President Nkrumah. It stirred controversy in Britain, but she proved to be a leader ahead of her time. Now, King Charles will lead the Commonwealth. African nations with no historic links to the UK are choosing to join. But this is a continent that's changing fast, and preserving his mother's legacy will not be without its challenges.
A royal welcome on the first of 3 visits to India. In 1961, the Queen was in the early years of her reign.
I am indeed grateful to the citizens of Delhi.
And India was a young republic still enamored by the empire. Crowds gathered everywhere she went. As India turned 50, Queen Elizabeth sought to address some of the dark chapters of colonial history. At this public park, unarmed Indians were shot dead by British soldiers a century ago. The royal couple paid tributes, but stopped short of an apology. 75 years since independence, India is trying to move away from its past, and its links with the British royal family have become less significant. It's a complicated relationship because of the nature of colonial rule. But what we've seen here today is most people looking beyond the institution that the Queen represented to the person she was. And a deep sense of respect has been reflected in the tributes. Nice to see you again. Indian Prime Minister Modi recalled his meetings with her. She personified dignity and decency in public life, he wrote. A day of mourning will be held on Sunday.
A warm welcome to Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh.
A young Queen Elizabeth in Jamaica on her first royal visit. Back in 1953, crowds were eager to catch a glimpse of the new monarch. The Queen, it said, had a deep affection for the island and would go on to visit a further 5 times. Reflecting on her life and service, officials here called her a portrait of dignity.
Jamaica is observing a period of mourning and flags are flying at half-mast. But there is a generational divide. While some older Jamaicans have shed a tear and expressed sadness, others, especially the youth, don't feel that same close connection. To them, the royal family hasn't properly atoned for Britain's historic role in slavery and colonization by way of a formal apology or reparations.
Nostalgia for the past is not a road many are interested in traveling. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge tried to emulate the Queen's 1953 visit, riding the very same Land Rover in March. It drew attention only to how much Jamaica had changed. The Prime Minister bluntly told the couple his country would move to become a republic, something 4 other islands in the Caribbean have already done. For now, though, the focus here is on paying respect to the Queen and the new monarch. On Saturday, the Jamaican Defence Forces will deliver a 21-gun salute to celebrate King Charles III.
Let us turn back to Buckingham Palace and to Rebecca Jones, who has also some people with her watching events as they unfold. Rebecca.
Absolutely, yes. Hello to you from Buckingham Palace, where the new king, King Charles III, has been inside for about 3.5 hours today. He's been holding a series of meetings. We've just seen the Dean of Westminster go into Buckingham Palace. We know, of course, that the Queen's funeral will take place at Westminster Abbey, and most of the arrangements for that will have been made in advance, but who knows, there may be some details to iron out. And just before he went in, we saw Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNP at Westminster, and Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, leave the palace on foot. They'd been to see the new king, along with the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. And a bit before them, members of the cabinet had also been in to meet the new king. So really, for him, the day-to-day job of being king has well and truly got underway. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined by somebody who does know the new king, Linda Yeuh, chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Linda, lovely to have you with us. And I know you were with Prince Charles, as he was earlier in the year in Kigali when he was representing the Queen at a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Tell us about your impressions.
I think what really struck me was how King Charles, I think his approach is very similar to the Queen. Immediately, he seeks to put you at ease. They're both very passionate about the Commonwealth and very passionate about charitable work. We're the oldest charity in the Commonwealth. So we were in Rwanda with the gathering of Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, but he made sure to include a project that is the very first environmental project in the Queen's name. The Queen's Commonwealth Canopy. All Commonwealth countries have signed up to protecting their forests, for generations to come. And so I think that gives a flavor of how he is. Yes, the diplomatic side, extremely important, but focusing on people and how you can improve the environment, those are things that I think he will carry with him as he, he is king, as he gets into this role.
Yeah, I know you have met him on a number of occasions. Can you give us some insight into the sort of person he is? I mean, is he a funny person, serious person? What kind of a man is he?
He is incredibly friendly, and I know this always sounds odd because there's obviously it's very formal. He was obviously the Prince of Wales, but it felt comfortable because he's so friendly. He's conversational. He knows who you are. He wants to know how you are. So there's no airs about the way that he interacts. And I think what I'm impressed by is his capacity to know issues and to know what area that you're working in. And he's very, very encouraging. So that sort of friendliness you also had with the Queen, because again, very strange to say, when you meet the Queen, no one tells you 100 instructions. They sort of generally guide you, but it's really meant to be a friendly encounter. But again, what I'm most struck by is how much King Charles cares about charitable work. And so it's a pleasure to speak to him every time. And you always end up, feeling your spirits lifted because he's so supportive.
Yeah. You mentioned the word passionate, and we know how much the Commonwealth meant to the Queen. How much did the Queen mean to the Commonwealth?
There's nobody who's made a greater contribution to the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth is 56 countries. It represents about 2.5 billion people. That's about a third of the world's population. And I have seen through our charitable work, which involves young people across the Commonwealth, how much the Queen means to them. So we organized the Commonwealth Service at Westminster Abbey. One of our speakers, young speakers last year, in March, was named Elizabeth after the Queen. And then after, if there is a flood or some horrible natural disaster, we would hear from our branches from across the Commonwealth how much the Queen's message means to them. And I would also stress, especially around communities, the Queen's commitment to developing people-to-people links, because that's actually what makes the Commonwealth rather different, unlike the G20 or something, because she was so focused and the royal family is so focused on what's happening in communities. It means that we have these links across people. So even if governments don't get along, we have that connection. And I think that's what's going to endure her impact. But there's no doubt in my mind, the Commonwealth, having grown under her 70 years as head, from 9 countries to 56 countries, that is a credit to her commitment to what she calls a network, a common family linked by friendship.
Chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society, we must leave it there, but really good to have you with us on what again feels yet another historic day here at Buckingham Palace. And who knows, the crowds are gathered here very much hoping that perhaps the new king will come out and greet them. We have no idea, but we will keep you posted. In the meantime, back to the studio.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and also to Linda. Well, I'm joined now by the man who was commissioned to paint the Queen in 1995. This is Christian Furr. You're so welcome, Christian. Thank you so much for joining us. I suppose, first off, I'd love to know how you first got that news that you were being commissioned to paint the Queen. How did that come about? I think I'm having just a little bit of an issue with your sound at the moment. Let us try it one more time. I'm afraid we're going to try and reconnect with Christian in a moment, because he's very interesting history, of course, with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Let me turn instead to another part of the Queen's life. She was part of the wartime generation that personified the values of duty and sacrifice. When she was 18, Princess Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the women's branch of the army, and trained as a mechanic. Our special correspondent, Fergal Keane, has been to meet 3 members of that wartime generation to ask what Her Majesty the Queen meant to them.
She grew to adulthood as her country fought for its life. A fight Princess Elizabeth inspired, in uniform and on the airwaves.
We children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen.
In the broad expanse of mid-Atlantic, units of the British Navy guard the ocean that is the most vital battle zone of the war.
As Allied convoys braved German U-boats, Princess Elizabeth joined hundreds of thousands of young women in uniform, like Patricia Outram, a naval codebreaker.
She did exactly what I would have expected her to do, and did volunteer, and was active and in some ways equal to the other young women. in the services. So I think we grew up very much with the idea that you participate. You don't sort of watch from the sidelines. You have a responsibility to defend your country.
But this is also the story of a vision, of a country that represented a civilized sanctuary for survivors of the Nazi genocide.
I thought it was the best choice of my life. I literally thought I arrived in heaven when I first came to England.
For Auschwitz survivor Ivor Pearl, 13 when he came, the princess symbolized hope.
Am I right in saying that she represented safety to you?
Very much so. Safety, security, and love, and especially I was as I say 13 years old, lost everything, so I just thought that it was like a substitute parent.
The struggle for the survival of a free, united kingdom saw young men risk their lives day after day in bombing raids over Germany. Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell knew what it was to lose his friends to the war. Now 101, he mourns the loss of a queen and that sense of united wartime purpose she embodied.
The Queen was a perfect example of duty. She said right at the onset that she was going to devote her life to the service of the nation. That she saw as duty. She has gone after setting a matchless example, and sadly we shall never see the like of her again.
Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor, whose life and that of the generation she came from was shaped by war and its fearsome burdens. Fergal Keane, BBC News.
Well, I want to return now to the man who was commissioned to paint the portrait of the Queen in 1995, Christian Furr. We have sorted out the sound issues there, Christian. Thanks for persevering with us. I'd love to know, I'm not sure if you could hear me, about the moment you heard that you were going to be commissioned to paint the Queen. How do you remember it?
It came through a Commonwealth organisation, a place called the Royal Overseas League in London, and the Queen had seen one of my paintings that I'd done there. And there was something about that painting that must have triggered her interest.
And
because suddenly I got this call out of the blue from the Director General of the League. And he told me that the Queen would like me to paint her portrait. So it was an amazing thing to happen at that age.
I'm just seeing some of the pictures. What age were you then, Christian?
I was 28. And it was the year that Britpop exploded. And it was very exciting times, and I remember driving to the palace in my red Beetle, and the guards laughing at me when I arrived. And I wanted to do something different. I'd looked at lots of portraits of the Queen that had been done previously, and they all seemed to be very remote and a bit formal. So I wanted to go a bit closer and capture the humanity of the Queen, basically, and her, all aspects of her personality, including her humour, and her liveliness. You know, she was very lively as well as being serene. So all of those things I was trying to capture. When she actually arrived in the yellow drawing room after I'd been waiting for a while, she brought with her a blanket. And as she put it on the side of the throne, she said, "Do you mind if I, put this here?" And I said, "No, that's great," because I thought it showed an aspect of her personality that was important.
I heard, Christian, you correct me if I'm wrong, that she was very lively and it was difficult to get her to sit still. Is that true?
It is true. At one point, the Queen was enjoying and appreciating the music outside with the changing of the guard. And I forgot who it was that I was painting for a moment. And in my naivety, I said, "Oh, do you mind keeping your head still?" And I got back what I could only describe as a Paddington stare. But, she was great fun and really good at relaxing people and putting people at their ease. She was very friendly and she was very, very generous with her time. At the end of the sittings that I had, she said, "Have you got everything you need?" you know, do you need any more sittings? And I thought that was very kind of her.
And what about that, the interactions that you had with her? I know you forgot about it for a moment, but how difficult was that to be the person who was taking on such a job, really, with somebody of the utmost importance?
Well, I did feel under pressure in the studio and actually during the sittings, because I knew that this was the most recognisable person in the world, and you know, every brushstroke mattered, really. So I knew that I had to do my duty in that respect for somebody who'd spent her whole life in the service of the nation and the world, actually. We're hearing stories about the Commonwealth and everything. So it's a great, great responsibility for a young artist. So I did my best, and I hope I've achieved a lasting sort of image. You know, a portrait in the end is capturing someone's life. So I hope I achieved that.
Yes, indeed. We are seeing the picture there. Thank you so much, Christian. Lovely to have your memories as well with us. That's Christian Furr. Now, I want to return, as we have many times today, to Buckingham Palace. And you can just see the crowds that continue to arrive there. We've been hearing from my colleagues, Rebecca Jones and also Charlotte Gallagher, just about the people that continue to arrive. And of course, they are paying their respects to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, but also they are entering into this new era and welcoming King Charles III. I think many of them are really hoping that in fact he will come down, perhaps to greet those well-wishers, but we'll have to wait and see. Let me turn now to my colleague, Christian Fraser.
You're watching BBC News. Welcome to viewers in the UK and around the world for this special programme on the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the accession to the throne of King Charles III. Crowds gather at Buckingham